He is the creator and sustainer of all the worlds, whether those worlds are known or unknown to mankind.
Here we go.
Hot takes!
Hot takes! Alright, today we're talking construction with me, Mr Gardam, Miss Willmott, as always, and Mr Driscoll.
Hello.
Cool, construction. What's the most prominent feature to you guys that Steinbeck uses in the text?
Oh boy.
It's a good one. He's got so many. I think one thing that flies under the radar for me is the use of his motifs. And just a lot of recurring elements that I think, if you take them in isolation, mean very little. But as soon as you start sort of taking all of those particular examples over the entire duration of the narrative, such as the fact that Lenny can't stay out of trouble, and that always has grave implications on George, and what that means for not only their relationship and, companionship, but also how people perceive acts of people maybe with mental disabilities, and the fact that they can't be helped. And then sometimes the only outcome is to try to kill them.
That's really interesting, and I like as well that also links in with the intertextual reference to Robert Burns's
To a mouse.
of mice and men. Plans oft go awry, and the way that the mouse in the poem is fearful of the farmer, having had no interactions before, and the farmer's sort of bemoaning the fact that he's got this reputation already. The mouse is so fearful of him, even though they've never interacted and he meant it no harm. So that sort of, links in with that motif really well of sort of prejudice and predetermined ideas of who people are based on a stereotype.
Yeah, and it could even be that fear of, because you feel weaker or inferior, you are scared of the ramifications from those maybe in higher power or that have the power to some degree, such as Curly in the book.
I think it's really easy when thinking about construction to just immediately latch on to these language devices that we've been talking about. And that can certainly be a way into discussing construction. So talking about your metaphors and your similes and your repetition and your foreshadowing and all of that sort of stuff. But construction isn't just those things. And it can be specific word choices, whether or not you are reading dialogue versus narration. The fact that it is a novella, and novellas are constructed in a particular way. So why is each chapter constructed like its own little play, like its own scene in a static set, characters come in and out? Why has Steinbeck done this? And I think by interrogating those things as well, you can find more things to discuss when you're trying to talk about construction than just those individual techniques.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think just on that as well, when it comes to novella, I think it's highly relevant to consider the fact that this was such a common occurrence back there that Lenny and George's story doesn't even warrant a full book. It was such an endemic across all of American West at that point in time that this happened to everyone. So I'm just going to give you a snapshot of one particular case.
People who don't want to read Grapes of Wrath.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh boy. That is right. But no, I agree. I think you need to be looking, like you said, at the language choices, the use of the verbs, the difference between characters' dialogue with each other, and then the narrator's words and prose.
Yeah, the fact that he writes in a very idiosyncratic, phonetic sort of way. Like he is writing deliberately to embody the voice of these people that he spent so much time with.
Yeah.
Correct.
So it's both accent but also education,
Yeah, absolutely.
refinement. And you'll notice that often Crooks is the one who speaks in full and correct sentences. And with that obsession that he has with, reading the dictionary and his mauled copy of the 1905 California Civil Code, that sort of suggests his sort of passionate pursuit of education and literacy, because there was that trend of denying African American people the vote if they were deemed illiterate. So that's also mirrored by Steinbeck in the way he's written Crooks's language. Other people use slang a lot and their words are contracted heavily. Crooks doesn't do that super regularly, and I think it's showing that effort to be more literate through fear of losing his right to vote, which he holds to so passionately.
Absolutely.
I just had a really great session with one of my classes where we did a close reading on the death of Curly's wife, and we looked at that. It's literally only 3 lines in the book, but it's talking about how the moment that was more than a moment, and that the moment stretched like beyond a moment, and it was this like great sense of calm and stillness and like erasure of the outside world, and how we could look at the construction of that particular scene and
atmosphere for those playing at home.
Yeah, and it's literally atmosphere, like the calm before the storm. There is a change in the atmosphere. So how can we look at the word choices and the construction of like 3 lines and extrapolate that into a whole paragraph? Because there's so much in what Steinbeck does, and you don't have to do that. You don't have to create a whole paragraph of 3 lines, but
you can.
But you could, and it's worth taking the time to interrogate these elements of construction, because it will make your responses much more rich.
Yeah.
And you're pitching that super high, so that's like what we're expecting in senior school, and it's really, really good to start here because that's what they're going into anyway. For people who are more like entry level talking about construction, you were right that focusing on technique is a really simple way to start. It's not the most refined, but at this stage, any effort towards construction I think is going to be useful. The easiest one in my mind, and you guys can totally disagree, would be symbolism.
Yep.
And being able to discuss the fact that Crooks is not a person, he does not exist. He is a symbol of the plight of African American men at the time.
Correct.
Curly's wife never existed, but she is symbolic of women and their roles in society at
Just
the time.
on that, just with Curly's wife, a student actually spoke to me last class, and it's something I probably hadn't thought about. But when you say the representation, the fact that her name isn't necessarily wife or woman, it is Curly apostrophe S, which shows possession, which shows the mentality of that time, and gender, and all of that sort of imbalance of power.
Beautiful. And that single apostrophe is construction.
Yeah.
And that they could write a whole paragraph about the symbolism of that one apostrophe, and that would be a bloody terrific paragraph.
That'd be a great paragraph.
So there's lots of room to move with construction, and I think, like you were saying before, Mr. Willmott, like if your entry is talking about literary devices, cool, great, talk about it. If you want to stretch that sort of higher level, great. I think across the board, though, we are at a point where we are expecting that you are addressing construction in some way, shape, or form in every single paragraph. You can no longer get away with just ignoring this whole aspect of Steinbeck's writing, or anyone's writing, in your essays. So however you want to approach it, but make sure that you are doing that work in your essays.
Well, yeah, year 7 and year 8, I think, were the last possible opportunities to talk about the events of the text like they matter. They do not matter. I don't care about what happened to Curly or Slim. It is not about that at all. When you are analysing a text, the reason why it's called text response is because you are responding to the actual text. That is what you're holding in your hand, what Steinbeck has said, why he said it. It's more focusing on Steinbeck than the actual character. So at this level, if you are only talking about characters and events, and you can prove a good knowledge of the text, and you can prove an adequate ability to write an essay, you're going to get a C. And that's fantastic, that's great. But if you want to stretch, you have to start talking about constructive elements, and you have to start talking about authorial intent.
Absolutely.
Cool.
How it's written, why it's written, the way it's written. Absolutely.
100%.
Cool.
I think that's us. Thank you.
That's it. Hot takes.
Hot takes.
Love it.